he was just the old man who cleaned the gym, until 3 bullies cornered him. That's when everyone learned who he really was. Welcome to Secret Stories. Before we continue this incredible story of hidden strength, respect, and unexpected heroism, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us share these powerful narratives. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being part of our community. Frank Miller had been cleaning Iron Peak Fitness Center in downtown Denver for 3 years. And in all that time, most members had never bothered to learn his name. To them, he was simply the old janitor who arrived before dawn to mop the floors, wipe down the equipment, and empty the trash bins before the morning rush began. At 62 years old, with graying hair and a slight limp in his left leg, Frank moved through the gym like a ghost, invisible to the young athletes who dominated the weight room and cardio machines. The gym was located in one of Denver's most affluent neighborhoods, catering to a clientele of young professionals, college athletes, and fitness enthusiasts who paid premium membership fees for access to state-of-the-art equipment and personal training services. Most members arrived in expensive cars, wore designer workout clothes, and carried themselves with the confidence that came from success and privilege. They barely acknowledged the support staff who kept their fitness sanctuary. Spotless and functional, Frank preferred it that way. Invisibility had become his refuge, a comfortable anonymity that allowed him to work in peace without drawing attention to himself or his past. He had deliberately chosen this job precisely because it required minimal interaction with others. He could arrive at 5 in the morning, complete his duties by 7, and be gone before the gym filled with its usual crowd of ambitious young people pursuing their fitness goals with single-minded determination. What none of the members knew, what Frank had never told anyone during his 3 years of employment, was that he had spent 28 years in the United States Marine Corps, serving as a hand-to-hand combat instructor at the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program. He had trained thousands of Marines in the deadly arts of close-quarters combat, teaching them techniques that could disable or kill an opponent in seconds. His specialty had been developing training programs for elite units, including Force Reconnaissance and Marine Special Operations Command. Frank had joined the Marines straight out of high school in rural Colorado, the son of a rancher who had raised him to believe in hard work, discipline, and standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. He had excelled in boot camp, volunteered for advanced combat training, and eventually been selected to become an instructor at the Marine Corps Martial Arts Center of Excellence. For nearly 3 decades, he had lived and breathed the warrior ethos, teaching young Marines how to fight, how to survive, and how to protect their brothers in arms. The end of his military career had come suddenly and painfully. During a training exercise at Camp Pendleton, Frank had suffered a severe injury to his left leg when a piece of equipment malfunctioned. The damage required multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation, leaving him with a permanent limp and chronic pain that ended his active duty status. At 59, after 28 years of service, Frank had found himself forced into retirement, struggling to adapt to civilian life after spending his entire adult life in the military. Transition had been brutal. Frank had tried several jobs, from security work to personal training, but nothing felt right. The corporate world seemed alien to him, full of politics and personalities that he couldn't navigate. Personal training came closer to his skill set, but most clients wanted someone younger, more energetic, more in tune with the latest fitness trends. Frank's old-school approach to physical conditioning, based on military principles of discipline and incremental progress, didn't appeal to people who wanted quick results and Instagram-worthy workouts. Eventually, he had taken the custodial job at Iron Peak Fitness Center, not because he loved cleaning, but because it was honest work that paid enough to cover his modest needs. His military pension provided basic financial security, and the janitorial position gave him something to do with his days while keeping him around the fitness environment he understood. Most importantly, it allowed him to remain invisible, avoiding the complicated social dynamics that he found so exhausting in civilian life. The trouble had started 3 weeks ago when a new group of members joined the gym. 3 young men in their early 20s, clearly friends from college, had signed up together and quickly established themselves as the gym's most obnoxious presence. They monopolized equipment, left weights scattered around the floor, and spoke loudly about their workout routines, social lives, and opinions on everything from politics to sports. Their leader was Brennan, a 22-year-old business, the student whose father owned several car dealerships in the Denver area. Tyler was tall, muscular, and handsome, with the kind of confident swagger that came from never being told no by anyone who mattered. Tyler's 2 companions were Jake Morrison and Connor Hayes, both college juniors who seemed to exist primarily to laugh at Tyler's jokes and validate his inflated sense of importance. Jake was smaller but more aggressive, always looking for a reason to start an argument or prove his toughness. Connor was the follower, content to go along with whatever Tyler and Jake decided to do, as long as it maintained his position in their social hierarchy. From the beginning, the 3 had treated Frank with casual disrespect. They would drop towels on the floor he had just mopped, leave protein shake containers on equipment he had just cleaned, and make comments about the old janitor loud enough for him to hear. Frank had endured it all in silence, cleaning up after them without complaint, hoping they would eventually lose interest and find other targets for their juvenile behavior. But their harassment had escalated over the past week. Tyler had started making increasingly personal comments about Frank's age, his limp, and his position as a janitor. He would ask Frank if he needed help carrying the mop bucket, suggest that someone his age should be playing shuffleboard instead of working, wonder aloud why the gym hired people who were past their expiration date. Jake and Connor would laugh at these comments, encouraging Tyler to push further each time. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when Tyler decided to test Frank's limits in front of an audience. The gym was busier than usual, with several regular members working out before heading to their jobs. Tyler had just finished a set of bench presses and was feeling particularly confident after lifting what he considered an impressive amount of weight. He noticed Frank mopping near the free weight area and saw an opportunity to entertain his friends and assert his dominance. Tyler approached Frank with exaggerated swagger, his chest puffed out and his voice deliberately loud enough to carry across the gym floor. He wanted everyone to witness what he considered a harmless bit of fun at the expense of someone who couldn't fight back. Frank was wringing out his mop in the bucket, focused on his work, when Tyler's voice cut through the ambient noise of the gym. "Hey old-timer," Tyler called out, causing several nearby members to look up from their workouts. "You missed a spot over there. Maybe you need some glasses to go with that limp." Frank didn't respond immediately. He continued cleaning, hoping Tyler would lose interest and move on to something else. But Tyler was just getting started. He moved closer, emboldened by the attention he was receiving from the growing audience of gym members who had stopped their workouts to watch the confrontation unfold. "I'm talking to you, Grandpa," Tyler continued, his voice taking on a more aggressive edge. "You know, my dad owns 3 car dealerships in this city. I could probably get you a job washing cars. If this cleaning thing doesn't work out, it might be easier on those old bones of yours." Jake and Connor positioned themselves on either side of Tyler, forming a semicircle that effectively trapped Frank between the mop bucket and the weight rack. The message was clear: they weren't going to let him simply walk away from this confrontation. Other gym members had stopped their workouts entirely now, some pulling out their phones to record what they assumed would be a harmless bit of drama. Frank slowly straightened up, his hand still gripping the mop handle. For the first time in 3 years, he looked directly at Tyler Brennan, his gray eyes meeting the younger man's gaze with a steadiness that should have served as a warning. But Tyler was too caught up in his performance to recognize the danger. He was walking into "What's the matter, old man?" Tyler taunted, stepping closer until he was less than 2 feet from Frank's face. "Cat got your tongue, or are you just too old to understand what I'm saying?" Frank's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet and measured. Years of addressing Marine recruits had taught him that true authority didn't need volume to command respect. "Son," he said calmly, "I think you should step back and return to your workout." Tyler laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly quiet gym. "Did you just call me son? That's rich, coming from someone who mops floors for a living. What are you, like 70 years old? Shouldn't you be in a nursing home somewhere?" That's when Tyler made his crucial mistake. Perhaps emboldened by the audience, perhaps misreading Frank's calm demeanor as weakness, he reached out and gave Frank a hard shove on the shoulder, causing the older man to stumble slightly. The mop fell from Frank's hands and clattered to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent gym. For a moment, nobody moved. Tyler stood with his hand still extended from the push, a smug grin on his face as he waited for Frank's reaction. Jake and Connor flanked him, ready to jump in if the old janitor tried to retaliate. The watching gym members held their breath, phones still recording, expecting to see either a pathetic attempt at fighting back or a humiliating retreat. What happened next would be talked about at Iron Peak Fitness Center for years to come. Frank Miller slowly straightened up from where Tyler's push had forced him back. His gray eyes had changed, taking on a coldness that several observant viewers would later describe as unsettling. When he spoke, his voice carried a new quality, something that made everyone in the immediate area unconsciously take a step back. "You just put your hands on me, son," Frank said quietly. That was a mistake. Tyler, still high on his own bravado, failed to recognize the shift in atmosphere. "Yeah, what are you going to do about it, old man? Call security? Report me to management? Maybe you should just accept that you're out of your league here." Frank didn't respond with words. Instead, he moved with a speed and precision that defied his age and apparent frailty. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward, grabbed Tyler's extended wrists, and applied a pressure point technique that sent shooting pain up the young man's arm while simultaneously using his leverage to pull Tyler off balance. Before Tyler could react, Frank had swept his legs and controlled his fall, putting him face down on the gym floor with his arm twisted behind his back in a submission hold that would have made any martial arts instructor proud. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds and was executed with such clinical precision that most observers barely understood what they had witnessed. Tyler found himself unable to move, his face pressed against the rubber matting while Frank maintained perfect control over his position. Any attempt to struggle sent waves of pain through his trapped arm and shoulder. The transformation was so sudden and complete that for several seconds, Tyler couldn't even process what had happened to him. Jake Morrison, seeing his friend on the ground, made the mistake of trying to intervene. He lunged forward, probably intending to grab Frank from behind, but the older man was ready for him. Without releasing his hold on Tyler, Frank pivoted and used his free hand to execute a simple but effective palm strike to Jake's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and sending him stumbling backward into a rack of dumbbells. Connor Hayes, the third member of the group, froze in place as he realized that whatever was happening was far beyond his understanding or ability to handle. The old janitor had just neutralized two of his friends in a matter of seconds, and Connor's survival instincts were telling him to stay very still and avoid drawing attention to himself. The gym had fallen completely silent except for Tyler's labored breathing and Jake's attempts to catch his breath. Frank maintained his position, keeping Tyler immobilized while scanning the area to ensure there were no other threats. His movements were economical and professional, betraying decades of training in exactly these kinds of situations. "Now," Frank said, his voice still calm despite what had just occurred, "I'm going to let you up, and you're going to apologize for putting your hands on me. Then you're going to clean up any mess you've made, and you're going to treat the staff of this establishment with respect. Do we understand each other?" Tyler, his face still pressed against the floor, managed to nod weakly. The pain in his arm and the complete helplessness of his position had stripped away all his bravado, leaving only a confused and frightened young man who had just learned that the world contained dangers he had never imagined. Frank slowly released the hold and stepped back, allowing Tyler to push himself up to his hands and knees. The young man's face was flushed with embarrassment and residual pain, his carefully styled hair disheveled, his expensive workout clothes wrinkled and dirty. He looked around at the crowd of observers, many of whom were still recording with their phones, and realized that his humiliation was being documented for posterity. As Tyler struggled to his feet, Jake was also recovering, leaning against the dumbbell rack and holding his chest where Frank's palm strike had landed. Connor remained frozen in place, his eyes wide with shock as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The silence in the gym was broken by slow, deliberate applause. It started with one person, an older woman named Margaret, who had been using the elliptical machine, and quickly spread throughout the crowd. Within seconds, most of the gym members were clapping, some cheering, many smiling at the three young men who had finally received the comeuppance they had been earning for weeks. But Frank looked around at the applauding crowd with obvious discomfort. This was exactly the kind of attention he had been trying to avoid for 3 years. He raised his hand to quiet the crowd, his expression making it clear that he didn't want to be celebrated for what had just occurred. "There's nothing to applaud here," Frank said firmly. "This was just a misunderstanding that got out of hand. I think we should all get back to our workouts." But the crowd wasn't ready to let the moment pass. Several members approached Frank, introducing themselves for the first time despite having seen him almost daily for 3 years. They wanted to know where he had learned to fight like that, whether he had military experience, why he had never mentioned his obvious skills before. Margaret, the woman who had started the applause, was particularly insistent. "I've been coming to this gym for 5 years, she said, "and those 3 have been making everyone uncomfortable since they joined. You did what we all wished we could do." Frank shook his head. "I didn't do this for entertainment, ma'am. I just defended myself when things got physical. I hope it doesn't happen again." Tyler, Jake, and Connor had gathered near the gym's entrance, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Tyler was rubbing his arm where Frank had applied the submission hold, and Jake was still breathing carefully from the strike to his solar plexus. They were clearly discussing whether to stay or leave, but their decision was made for them when Marcus Rodriguez, the gym manager, appeared and approached their group. Marcus had been in his office handling paperwork when the commotion started, but he had quickly emerged to see what was happening. Now, having witnessed the aftermath and spoken to several members who had seen the entire incident, he was prepared to address the situation. "Gentlemen," Marcus said to the 3 young men, "I think we need to have a conversation about your membership." Here, Tyler tried to regain some of his earlier confidence. "That old man attacked us. We were just having a conversation, and he went crazy. You should call the police." Marcus looked at Tyler with obvious skepticism. "Interesting perspective, because I have about 15 witnesses who say you shoved him first, and several phone videos that back up their account. Would you like me to review that footage with you?" The color drained from Tyler's face as he realized that his aggressive behavior had been captured on multiple phones. In an age where viral videos could destroy reputations overnight, the last thing he needed was footage of himself bullying an elderly janitor spreading across social media. Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had made a decision. "Here's what's going to happen. Your memberships are being revoked, effective immediately. You have 15 minutes to gather your belongings and leave the premises. If you come back, you'll be trespassing." Jake tried to protest. "You can't do that. We paid for annual memberships. Our parents will hear about this." "I'm sure they will," Marcus replied calmly, "and they'll probably want to know why their sons were harassing a 62-year-old employee." I'll be happy to share the security footage with them if they have questions." As the three young men gathered their things and prepared to leave, Frank had quietly picked up his mop and returned to his cleaning duties. He was hoping the crowd would disperse and allow him to finish his work in peace, but Marcus approached him with a different agenda. "Frank," Marcus said, "I think we need to talk. My office, when you have a minute." Frank nodded reluctantly. He had been dreading this conversation since the moment Tyler hit the floor. He was certain that Marcus was going to fire him, probably for liability reasons if nothing else. Corporate policies generally didn't allow for employees to engage in physical altercations, regardless of the circumstances. 20 minutes later, Frank sat across from Marcus in the small office behind the gym's front desk. Marcus was a former college athlete in his 30s who had taken over management of the gym 2 years earlier. He was known for being fair but firm with both employees and members, and Frank respected him as a boss even though they rarely interacted. "Frank," Marcus began, "I have to ask you this directly. What's your background? Because what I just saw out there wasn't something you learned from watching YouTube videos." Frank had been preparing for this question since agreeing to the meeting. He could lie, make up some story about taking self-defense classes, but Marcus deserved the truth. And honestly, Frank was tired of hiding who he was. 28 years, United States Marine Corps, Frank said quietly. Hand-to-hand combat instructor, primarily working with special operations units. "I retired 3 years ago due to injury." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "And you've been cleaning our gym because it's honest work, and it pays the bills," Frank replied. "I tried other jobs after retiring, but civilian life is ... complicated. This job lets me work alone, doesn't require much interaction with people, and keeps me busy. I never intended for my background to become relevant." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the implications of having a former Marine combat instructor working as his janitor. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there before. "Frank, I'm not going to fire you. What happened out there was self-defense, pure and simple. Those three have been causing problems since they joined, and, frankly, I'm grateful someone finally put them in their place. But I do have a proposition for you." Frank raised an eyebrow, unsure where this was leading. Marcus continued, "We've been looking for someone to teach self-defense classes. The demand is definitely there, especially among our female members who want to feel safer walking to their cars at night. Would you consider adding that to your responsibilities? Obviously, we'd pay you additional compensation." Frank was genuinely surprised by the offer. "Marcus, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for it. I'm used to training Marines, not civilian women looking for basic self-defense." "That's exactly why you're perfect for it," Marcus insisted. "You know the real techniques, the ones that actually work when someone's life is in danger. Most self-defense instructors teach sport, martial arts, or watered-down techniques that look good in a controlled environment but fail under pressure. You teach the real thing." Frank considered the offer. The idea of teaching again, of passing on skills that could genuinely help people protect themselves, was appealing. And working with civilians who wanted to learn would be very different from the harassment he had been enduring from Tyler and his friends. "What would you expect from me?" Frank asked. 2 classes a week, probably evening sessions to accommodate work schedules. Basic self-defense techniques, situational awareness, maybe some physical conditioning. Nothing too fancy, just practical skills that ordinary people can learn and use if they need to. Frank found himself nodding slowly. "I'd want to design the curriculum myself, and I'd need to make it clear from the beginning that this isn't a game. Self-defense is about survival, not sport." Marcus smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything less from a Marine instructor. Do we have a deal?" As Frank shook Marcus's hand, he realized that his 3 years of invisibility were coming to an end. Tyler Brennan and his friends had unwittingly forced him back into the light, back into a role where his skills and experience mattered. It wasn't the way he had planned to emerge from his self-imposed exile, but perhaps it was time. Word of the incident spread quickly through the gym's membership. By the next morning, several members had specifically asked Marcus about Frank's background and whether he would be offering any training services. The phone footage of the confrontation had been shared privately among friends, creating a buzz of interest in the quiet janitor who had revealed himself to be something far more impressive. Margaret, the woman who had initiated the applause, became Frank's most vocal advocate. She had signed up for his first self-defense class before he had even finalized the curriculum, and she convinced several of her friends to join her. Within a week, Frank had a waiting list of potential students. The first class was held on a Tuesday evening in the gym's group exercise room. 12 women, ranging in age from their 20s to their 60s, gathered to learn from the man they had seen effortlessly handle 3 aggressive young men. Frank had spent hours preparing his lesson plan, adapting military training techniques for civilian students who would never face combat but might someday need to escape from a dangerous situation. He started with the basics: situational awareness, recognizing threats, understanding the psychology of attackers. Then he moved to simple physical techniques: focusing on escapes rather than confrontation, emphasizing speed and surprise over strength and aggression. The students were attentive and eager to learn, treating Frank with a respect he hadn't experienced since his retirement from the Marines. During the second week of classes, Frank received an unexpected visitor. A young man in his mid knocked on the gym's front door after hours, asking to speak with the self-defense instructor. Marcus called Frank over, and the visitor introduced himself as Lieutenant David Chen, United States Marine Corps, recently returned from a deployment in the Middle East. Sir, Lieutenant Chen said, "I heard about what happened here a couple weeks ago. My unit's gunnery sergeant served under you at Camp Pendleton in 2018. He told me if I ever had the chance to train with Sergeant Major Miller, I should take it." Frank was surprised to hear his former rank used in civilian surroundings. He had deliberately avoided mentioning his final promotion, preferring to let people think of him as simply a former Marine, rather than a senior non-commissioned officer who had influenced thousands of military careers. "Your gunny has a good memory," Frank replied. "But I'm just teaching basic self-defense here, nothing that would be relevant to an active-duty Marine." Lieutenant Chen smiled. "Actually, sir, I was hoping you might consider working with our reservists. We have a unit based here in Denver, and they could benefit from advanced hand-to-hand combat training. The Corps has evolved since you retired, but the fundamentals you taught are still the foundation of everything we do." As Frank listened to the young officer's request, he realized that his accidental return to prominence was opening doors he hadn't expected. Tyler Brennan's arrogance and aggression had inadvertently reconnected Frank with the military community he had served for nearly 3 decades. 6 months later, Frank Miller was no longer just the gym's janitor. He still maintained the facility in the early morning hours, but his afternoons and evenings were filled with teaching. He instructed civilian self-defense classes 3 times a week, worked with the Marine Reserve Unit twice a month, and had begun developing a specialized program for local law enforcement officers who wanted to improve their defensive tactics. The transformation wasn't just professional. Frank stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, and engaged with people in a way he hadn't since his retirement. His military bearing had returned, not in an intimidating way, but with the quiet authority that comes from knowing your place in the world and being comfortable with your abilities. Tyler Brennan, Jake Morrison, and Connor Hayes had inadvertently given Frank Miller the greatest gift possible. They had forced him to stop hiding from who he was. Their bullying and harassment had backfired spectacularly, revealing not a helpless old janitor, but a warrior who had temporarily lost his way and needed only a moment of conflict to remember his purpose. The gym members who had witnessed that Thursday morning confrontation often spoke about it as a turning point, not just for Frank, but for the entire culture of Iron Peak Fitness Center. Respect became more important than ego, and courtesy replaced casual cruelty. And Frank Miller, the man they had barely noticed for 3 years, became the quiet guardian whose presence reminded everyone that strength comes in many forms, and wisdom often wears the most humble disguises. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Sometimes the person you overlook is exactly the person you need to learn from. And sometimes, 3 young bullies discovered that the old man they chose to intimidate spent 3 decades teaching the finest warriors in the world how to fight. Frank Miller never wanted to be anyone's hero. He just wanted to work quietly and live peacefully. But when respect and dignity were on the line, he reminded everyone at Iron Peak Fitness Center that some skills are never forgotten, and some men never stop being Marines, even when they're just trying to mop the floor. Thank you for watching Secret Stories. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and help us share these powerful narratives about the hidden heroes who shape our world. And remember, you never know who might be working quietly beside you, carrying skills and experiences that could change everything when the moment demands it. Sometimes the most ordinary people are anything but ordinary.